Hi, my name is Jared Ward, and this will be my presentation on Abraham Lincoln. Before we get into the presentation, I've prepared a small video that will provide background on one of America's greatest presidents and the focus of my presentation.
What will you do? Will you make something better? Create.
He radiated a quality that people liked and respected, and that was the quality of being a wise old man. That's one of the things that made him a successful president.
Abraham Lincoln was born on February 12, 1809. He spent his first years in a log cabin in rural Kentucky. His mother's death when he was 9 years old deeply affected him and put more tension on his already strained relationship with his father.
He regarded his father as lacking ambition, as lazy, as anti-intellectual. All the things that Lincoln wanted to escape from, he saw in his father.
A love of knowledge made Lincoln into an intelligent, well-spoken, and popular young man as he worked a series of odd jobs in New Salem, Illinois.
When Lincoln talked, people listened, whether that was around pot-bellied stoves, in storefronts, at courthouses.
After a term in the Illinois state legislature, Lincoln decided to teach himself law. He passed the bar in 1837 and moved to Springfield, where he met Mary Todd.
Anybody who was watching what was going on in Springfield in those years knew that this was a fellow who was going to make a name for himself in some way, and Mary was attracted to that.
Abraham Lincoln and Mary Todd were married on November 4, 1842. Lincoln spent his next years practicing law, but in 1858, he decided to challenge Stephen Douglas for his seat in the U.S. Senate. Though Lincoln lost the election, he got the attention of National Republican Party leaders and won the party's nomination for president in 1860. In the national race, he would again face Stephen Douglas.
Stephen Douglas is saying that democracy is compatible with slavery. Lincoln has to undo that idea, or he won't be able successfully to challenge slavery.
Lincoln won the election, but his views on slavery did not make him a welcome leader in the South. By his inauguration in March 1861, 7 Southern states had seceded from the Union. On April 12, 1861, the Confederacy fired on Fort Sumter and began America's most deadly war. At first, Lincoln made the war about maintaining the Union so as not to offend the loyal slave states. But eventually, he shifted the cause to abolishing slavery, and on January 1, 1863, Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. Slavery was over. Lincoln easily won the election in 1864, and it would only be a few more months before Confederate General Robert E. Lee would surrender. With the war over, Lincoln could look forward to better times. Reconstruction had already begun, but there were those that didn't readily accept the outcome of the war.
John Wilkes Booth believed that Abraham Lincoln was truly an evil man, and Booth believed that by killing him, he would be doing a service to both his nation and to his race.
On April 14, 1865, John Wilkes Booth shot the president at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. Lincoln was taken across the street to a boarding house, where he died 9 hours later. The nation had lost a great leader at a time they needed him most.
Reconstruction would have been a totally different picture. There might not have been a need for a civil rights movement in this country. There might not have been a need for Martin Luther King Jr. had Lincoln not been assassinated.
So now that we've learned about him, let's talk about it. Abraham Lincoln was America's 16th president, a president known for his honesty and strong will. He was a man who, if he were to walk in a room, anyone would just turn and look at him. But this asks the questions. Why was he one of the most important historical figures in the United States history? He impacted the United States in many ways, pushing towards freeing African American slaves and reuniting the North and South United States after the start of the Civil War due to his presidency. His goals in unifying a nation while freeing those who deserved a spot in a nation he envisioned would show Americans that not only was he just some run-of-the-mill president, was someone who strived to better his country and bring everyone together equally and to give everyone an opportunity to strive towards their goals. At the start of his presidency, the Civil War began. The Civil War was the major conflict going on during his presidency, yet this didn't stop him from pursuing his goals of holding together the country together, which would shift to bringing it back together later on, while also freeing the slaves that were trapped under the rule of white slave owners in the South. The Civil War began on April 4th, 1861 at Fort Sumter in South Carolina. This would be the beginning of one of the largest turmoils on American soil right at the beginning of President Lincoln's presidency, but it begs the question, what would he do to stop it? During the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln had a few doctrines that he would use to prevent the Civil War from getting worse, while also helping him win the ensuing war. Congress passed an article of war prohibiting the army from returning escaped slaves to their masters, and Lincoln signed it into law. This would dampen the amount of slaves going back into the South during the Civil War, which would also play into a later doctrine he would pass on in his presidency. On July 17, 1862, Congress passed the Second Confiscation Act, which included provisions that freed the slaves of disloyal owners, authorized the presidency to employ African American soldiers in the rebellion, and calls for the voluntary colonization efforts. This additional doctrines would free them from slaves from their owners and allow them to join the army to support Lincoln, giving him more troops for his army and a larger advantage in the ensuing war. Later on in his presidency, he would put into act the Emancipation Proclamation. President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863, as the nation approached its third year of the bloody Civil War. The proclamation declared that all persons held as slaves within the rebellious states are and henceforth shall be free. This would help rally the Union to him both politically and military-wise, as the citizens would back his cause of bringing America together for all races. It would give cause to the war for the North, making this not just about some small quarrel about the South wanting to keep their slavery, but it instead became a war about freedom and peace for all the United States. Additionally, it would allow people to see Abraham Lincoln for the kind and strong-willed man that he is, as he set his goal to free those who were suffering at the hands of those who treated them as nothing more than property. After Abraham enacted the Emancipation Proclamation, it would create a massive turmoil between the North and the South states, due to being used as to free the slaves, which is what the South was fighting for, to keep their slaves, to keep their free labor. Lincoln would become the target of newspapers' ads and much more, calling him a traitor and a spy, along with accusing him of creating a slave rebellion to defeat the South, in a way trying to use slave owners' slaves against them just so he can use them as slaves for his army. However, it was a strong play from Lincoln which would eventually lead to the South winning the war. The U.S. Civil War ended on April 9, 1865, when the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia surrendered to the U.S. General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, a small village in central Virginia. The North was finally able to defeat the South in a battle and the joining of the United States to one whole nation. Under the presidency of Lincoln, the North would defeat the South and set into motion to free all slaves that had participated in the war and was still trapped under the ruthless slave owners in the South. However, unfortunately, this wouldn't last long due to unfortunate circumstances. On April 11, 1865, 2 days after Lee's surrender at Appomattox, Lincoln delivered a speech outlining his plans for peace and reconstruction. Within the audience was no other than John Wilkes Booth, a successful actor born and raised in Maryland. Booth was a fervent believer in slavery and white supremacy, and upon hearing Lincoln's words, he said to a companion, "Now by God, I put him through. That is the last speech he will ever make." John Wilkes Booth would unfortunately assassinate Abraham Lincoln on April 15, 1865, in Peterson's house while watching him play with his fiancée. His death would shock the nation, but it would do more harm toward the South than it would to the North, due to the fact that Lincoln's words and actions had proved to the people of the United States that the United States without slavery was possible. In conclusion, Abraham Lincoln was America's 16th president, yet about all presidents we've had up to the point, he was one of the most impactful, with his endeavors ranging from declaring abolishment of slavery, winning the Civil War, and giving African Americans a fighting chance in the United States. His impact on America will never be forgotten, as he sets an example for other presidents that come into office as time goes on. We must never forget that honesty and a strong will can make anyone a smart and strong individual. These are my cited sources.